A building is on fire. The flames are spreading. And somewhere across the city, a very wealthy man has just been informed. And he is smiling. This is not a metaphor. This happened. In the city of Rome, in the first century before the Common Era, there was a man who had engineered a system so audacious, so coldly rational, that burning buildings made him richer, not despite the destruction, because of it. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus, and by the time he died, he may have been the wealthiest private individual in the history of Western civilization. That qualification matters, and by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it is both necessary and almost beside the point. Because the question of how rich Crassus was leads somewhere far more unsettling than a number. It leads to a question about what wealth actually is, and what one man can do with enough of it to reshape an entire republic. Crassus did not inherit his fortune. He built it from nothing, from exile, from catastrophe, from the wreckage of other people's lives. He turned proscription lists into property portfolios. He turned slaves into a construction company. He turned fire into real estate. And at the peak of his power, he personally financed the political career of a young senator named Julius Caesar, effectively purchasing the future of Rome itself. So let us begin where Crassus began, with nothing. The year is approximately 87 BC. Rome is in the grip of civil war. The general Marius and his allies have seized the city, and they are hunting their political enemies with lethal intent. Among those enemies is the family of Marcus Crassus. His father and his brother are killed. Crassus himself flees to Spain and lives in hiding for months. When he returns to Rome, the political winds have shifted. Sulla has marched on the city and seized power, and Sulla, in consolidating his victory, publishes proscription lists, a mechanism that will define the next 2 decades of Roman property law. A proscription list, in Roman terms, is a death sentence with a property auction attached. Citizens named on the list were declared enemies of the state. Their property was seized and sold, fast, cheaply, to whoever had the cash and the nerve to buy it. Crassus had both. He moved through these auctions with the precision of a man who understood that other people's panic was his opportunity. He acquired estates, urban lots, and buildings at fractions of their true value. The foundation of the greatest private fortune in Roman history was built, quite literally, on the confiscated homes of executed men. Crassus understood that catastrophe, properly positioned, is indistinguishable from capital. Rome, in the late Republic, was a city of approximately 1 million people, the largest urban concentration in the Western world at that time, and almost none of them owned the buildings they lived in. They rented. They lived in insulae, multi-story apartment blocks that were, by modern standards, fire hazards of extraordinary danger. Crassus saw this not as a social problem, he saw it as a business model. He assembled a workforce of slaves trained specifically in construction and architecture, and waited for the city to burn. Consider what it means to own an entire city block while it burns. His men would approach the owner of the burning building and offer to buy. Right now. For whatever Crassus was willing to pay. The seller had moments to decide. The flames did not wait. Plutarch describes this system without flinching. Crassus would purchase the burning property and its neighbors at knockdown prices, then deploy his slave construction crews to rebuild and rent them at full market value. He did this across the city, systematically, repeatedly. The insulae he rebuilt became income-generating assets, permanent cash flows attached to the most densely populated city in the Western world. Every month, Rome's renters paid Crassus, not because they chose him, because he owned the walls around them. Parallel to his urban real estate operation, Crassus was building a second empire, one that operated underground quite literally. He owned silver mines in Spain, worked by slave labor, generating yields that few private citizens in the ancient world could match. Crassus did not simply own slaves for manual labor. He trained them. He specialized them. He owned scribes, educators, architects, craftsmen, physicians, a human capital portfolio that could be hired out, rented to other Romans, or deployed on his own projects. Human capital as an asset class means this: a trained slave was not an expense. A trained slave was an investment that generated returns every day it was deployed. Crassus understood this with a sophistication that would not look out of place in a modern private equity firm. By the time Crassus reached the peak of his power, Plutarch records his fortune at 7,100 talents of silver. 7,100 talents. That number requires translation. A talent was not a coin. It was a unit of weight, equivalent to roughly 26 kilograms of silver. 7,100 talents means roughly 185 metric tons of silver. In direct commodity terms, silver priced at today's market rates, that converts to something in the range of 170 million US dollars. A large fortune, but not by modern standards extraordinary. And here is where the methodology becomes everything. Direct commodity conversion is the wrong tool for measuring ancient wealth. It tells you what the metal weighs. It does not tell you what the wealth could do, what it could buy, what it could control, what fraction of an entire civilization's economic output it represented. The right tool is GDP share analysis. This method asks, what fraction of the total economy did one person's wealth represent? Economists estimated Roman GDP at roughly $43 billion in 2009 terms for the imperial period, a figure that gives us a genuine baseline for comparison. If Crassus's fortune represented the same share of Roman GDP that the highest estimates suggest, the conversion produces a figure between $1 and $2 trillion in modern terms. $1 to $2 trillion. Let that number exist for a moment without context. Just the number. $1 to $2 trillion. Then consider, Elon Musk, as of early 2025, was worth approximately $300 to $400 billion, making him, by most measures, the wealthiest person alive. Crassus, on the upper bound estimate, was worth more than 4 Elon Musks. But here is the critical point, stated not to hedge the claim, but to sharpen it. Modern billionaires operate in an economy of 8 billion people. Crassus operated in an economy of perhaps 50 to 80 million Romans and subjects. His wealth was not just large, it was structurally dominant in a way that has no modern equivalent. Scheidel and Friesen estimated that the top 1% of Roman society controlled roughly 16% of total Roman income. Within that 1%, Crassus was in a category alone. His wealth was not merely extreme. It was a gravitational field that bent Roman politics around it. In the late 60s BC, a young senator named Julius Caesar was politically ambitious, publicly brilliant, and financially catastrophic. His debts were so large they threatened to end his career before it began. Crassus paid them. Plutarch puts the figure at 830 talents. Think about what that means. One private citizen using personal wealth financed the political survival of the man who would become the most consequential individual in Roman history. Crassus did not buy a politician. He bought the future. Plutarch records that Crassus believed, and apparently stated, that no man deserved to be called rich unless he could fund an army from his own resources. This was not a boast. It was a definition. And Crassus was about to prove he met it. When Spartacus and his army of enslaved people shook the Roman Republic to its foundations, the Senate was paralyzed. Crassus stepped forward and personally funded the raising of 6 full legions, roughly 30,000 soldiers, equipped and paid by one man. The suppression of Spartacus made Crassus militarily credible for the first time. Combined with his financial dominance, he entered the most powerful political arrangement in Roman history, the first triumvirate alongside Pompey and Caesar, three men informally dividing the Roman world. And yet, the wealth was not enough. It was never enough. In 53 BC, Crassus led a Roman army east against the Parthian Empire, a campaign motivated, at least in part, by the desire for military glory to match his financial power. At the Battle of Carrhae, in what is now southeastern Turkey, the Parthians destroyed his army. Crassus was killed. The stories told about his death are almost too symbolic to be history. The Parthians, according to some accounts, poured molten gold into his mouth as mockery of the man whose life had been organized around accumulation. The direct conversion gives us roughly $170 million. The GDP share methodology gives us 1 to 2 trillion. Neither number is wrong. They are answering different questions. One asks what his silver would fetch today. The other asks what his wealth meant. On the GDP share measure, Crassus stands alongside the Rothschilds at their peak, alongside John D. Rockefeller, a small handful of individuals across all of recorded history whose wealth functioned less like money and more like a parallel state. He could raise armies. He could elect senators. He could buy the future of Rome, one burning building at a time. Which brings us back to where we started, a building on fire, a wealthy man smiling. Crassus did not just profit from Rome's chaos. He was patient enough to let the city burn, and disciplined enough to be standing there when it did. Wealth at that scale stops being about security or comfort. It becomes about what a man believes he deserves. Crassus believed he deserved Rome itself. He died in the desert, 3,000 miles from the city he had spent his life buying, chasing the one thing his fortune could not purchase, the kind of glory that survives the man. You now know exactly how rich Marcus Crassus was. The number is somewhere between 170 million and $2 trillion, depending on how you ask the question. But the more important thing you now know is this: the number was never the point. It was always the tool, and the tool was never quite enough.